Very much. Um, Obviously, I don't know who has spoken about what today, and hopefully there won't be much of an overlap. But the main thing I'd like to focus on right now, which I think is very important, because now that we're in the 9 days and approaching Tisha B'av, that the Gemara says that any generation in which the base of Mikdash is not rebuilt, it's as if it was destroyed in that generation, which is a pretty harsh judgment, especially for us so far down the road. I mean, it's a completely different Metzias that to have a base of Mikdash and to come off a period of time which you had Chachamim, the time of the Mishnah, people like Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi Shimon Yochai, and Rabbi Meir, great people who could certainly give us an appreciation what it means to have a base of Mikdash, to have a Avodas Hashem in the base of Mikdash. And it's very hard to appreciate and understand how you could have it and even lose it. This is how Eicha begins. The word Eicha itself means how. That's the big question. The huge question of Tisha B'av, of the 3 weeks of all of Jewish history, for that matter, really is how. Meaning, like, how do you get to such a point? How can you have a base of Mikdash, and how can you have even Nevuah at some point in time, and have a Moshe Rabbeinu? We see in this week's Parashat Devarim, which we read in advance of Tisha B'av, Shabbos Chazon, and Moshe Rabbeinu goes over the things that they did wrong, and including the rejection of Moshe Rabbeinu on the advice of Yisro. Yisro gives us idea back in Parshas Yisro about how there should be a hierarchy in the judgment system, the Beis Din, the Sanhedrin, which at first seems like an okay idea. Then Moshe does not complain about that or argue with it, and Hashem comes back and tells them this is how you should do it, and they do it. But in this week's parsha, next week's parsha, Moshe criticizes the Jewish people and calls it a rejection of Hashem, a rejection of him, of Moshe Rabbeinu himself, because they're looking to have lower court systems so they can bribe judges and get their way and perhaps confuse people and somehow win, even though they should lose, or at least come up with a compromise. But this question that just as like the thread that runs the entire thing is how is it possible that all these things can happen? And for those who have listened to me in the past, one of the main things that always played up is this idea that if you look at Jewish history, it's also very hard to see how it's possible, with all the examples we have from the past where the Jewish people have gone through the same thing. I mean, we've gone through the exact same over and over and over. It happened in Spain, and it happened in Europe, and it happened in this part of Europe, and it happened back in Roman times, it happened before that in Bavel, and all these things. And the amazing thing, the reason why the question comes up is because it's not like HaKadosh Baruch Hu abandoned us and didn't give us signs and warnings and messages and Nevi'im. I mean, Yirmiyahu wrote Eichel the first time they burned it. He's a prophet of God, a known prophet of God, of Yeshaya, and you have Yechezkel, known prophets of God, talking about terrible things that are going to happen if the Jewish people do not do tshuva, if they don't change, if they don't wake up to the reality of what's happening around them and the direction that they're going, that this is what's going to happen. And these are prophets that are known to talk to God. So they establish false prophets instead. False prophets who know they're lying, and others know they're lying, and they're giving prophecies of sunshine and happier times and all that against these prophecies of doom and gloom, which are coming from prophets of God, and killing even authentic prophets, Achav and Izabel, they're killing prophets. How does this happen? How do people become so disconnected from reality that they can literally, go to war against God? The Gemara says that at some point in the future, that Hashem is going to give Yeravim the opportunity to do tshuva. Now, it's a very oblique Gemara. It's hard to figure exactly what's going on here, but face value, the Kosh Baruch Hu comes to Yeravim, who's an evil person who, he believes in Torah, by the way. He knows that Torah is true. He believes in God. He knows that God is there. And he believes in the base of Mikdash, but somehow he's still a Rasha, still a terrible Rasha, very hard to comprehend. And later on, he gets a second chance, a phenomenal second chance that almost nobody ever gets, not without going through Gehenna. And Hashem comes to Yeravim and says to him, he says, listen, I'll give you a chance. You want to tshuva? The three of us will walk in Gan Eden together. Me, you, Ben Yishai, right? David and Melech. And who wouldn't jump at that opportunity? But certainly somebody who's got a terrible track record. Like, really? This is I can do tshuva still. I can fix this up, and I can avoid going to Gehenna, and go to the world to come, and even walk together with you and the holy King David in Gan Eden in the future. Wow, amazing! Where do I sign? He doesn't do that. Yeravim says, well, who's going to go first, me or David HaMelech? Well, of course, David HaMelech. He's the father of Mashiach. He's the anointed one. He's the king of Yehuda. You're just from Ephraim, Nah, I'm not interested. Now, did he talk to God? I don't know. I mean, it's like, but the Gemara is making a point. It's a very similar point. This cognitive dissonance, this mentality, it settles upon us. It takes over our minds. It's like literally like losing your mind. In a sense, because you've got the Torah, you've got the truth, you've got the Nevi'im, you've got Simani, because Baruch Hu is trying to help us along. And you have a Gemara that says a thing like this, where it says in any generation in which the Beis Hamikdash is not rebuilt, it's like as if it was destroyed, and that generation should make a people think like, what does that mean? I don't want to be responsible for destroying the Beis Hamikdash. What does that mean? How do I avoid that problem, that situation? And that's Eicha. How do we get to such a point where we can become so disconnected, so distant from the truth and the reality that we can go about our lives as if nothing is really that wrong? I personally had an experience of this accidentally. I was actually on the way to give a shiur in Ramat Beit Shemesh many years ago, and it depends upon the timing of it, but in the summertime, so Mariv was much later, and I would often have to plan my trip that I would stop in Beit Shemesh along the way to Daven Mariv so I could catch Mariv before the actual shiur, and I did, and stopped in the Kiryah in Beit Shemesh itself to Daven Mariv at a shul that I had found along the way, nice big shul, and I got there about 5 minutes to spare, and I decided to take a sefer off, rather just stand there for 5 minutes and just look at the people in the base medrash learning. I took a sefer, and because I only had 5 minutes, I wanted to say that it was instantly and entertaining, so to speak, and interesting. So I took the Zohar, and it randomly took a Zohar. I don't think I took it based on the Parashat, but I just took off a Zohar, opened for 5 minutes. A lot of fun sometimes. You just take any sefer, you have 5 minutes, you open it up to see what you can get. I used to do this by bus stops, just to see if I can understand the Tosfos on the spot in these 2 minutes I had to do something. It's kind of a challenge. And I happened to open up I think it was Parashat Behalosecha at the time, and the Zohar was asking the question that, the pasuk Moshe Rabbeinu says, Kan never find Allah, right? So not Karafan Allah. He said, because Baruch Hu had given Miriam tzaras, and Aaron comes to Moshe Rabbeinu and says to him, daven for her because she's got tzaras, she's got leprosy. And Moshe says the words, right? He davens for her, very short tefillah. And the Meforshim asked the question, what does this mean? Right? Not Rafan Allah. What does it mean that he doesn't mention Miriam's name anywhere? What's this short tefillah? We have all these long schools and tefillahs and Meshaberachs and all that. We mentioned the person's name. He doesn't mention Miriam anywhere. And the one shot is because he was her brother, and he didn't want to make it seem like nepotism, that he had more concern about her than other people who might be sick too. And therefore he kept her name out. Another pshat says because it was an emergency situation and he didn't want to waste time by putting the name in, because if someone is sick, you don't want to take any extra time to daven for their health. Today, perhaps we're not as makpi, because who knows how fast our tefillahs get to Shemaim anyhow. But in Moshe's time, when Moshe daven was right to Kosh Baruch, so a few extra seconds but perhaps make a difference. That was a different pshatim. The Zohar has a whole different take that really opened my mind to a whole different way of looking at things. The Zohar says because he was not davening for Miriam. When it says that he davened for her, the her does not refer to Miriam. What does it refer to? The Shechina. Why? Because really a person, they want parnasa, they want shidduch, they want shidduchim for their children, they want all the brachas that we've done for all the time. Shlemer for somebody, right? So we imagine, I'll speak for myself, we imagine it doesn't exist yet. We're asking Kadosh Baruch Hu to create it and send it down to us. This refuah shlema, not, even though the Gemara says that the refuah always comes before the makkah, but okay, so whatever, parnasa is also refuah, right? So we imagine the Kadosh Baruch Hu, okay, this guy is asking for 5,000 shekels. Get out the printing press, turn it on. Let's get some money printed and send it back down somebody to help this person out. Ki'ilu Kadosh Baruch Hu has to create it from scratch at the time we're asking for it. And that's a big deal. But the Leshem, Rabbi Shlomo Leshem explains that that's not the way it works. You have to understand that really the shefa, all the brocha that we could ever want, and way more than you could ever imagine, is up in Shemayim. It's already there. Because Baruch Hu lives, Kiviyochel, to give us all this brocha. You said Gan Eden. Look at Gan Eden, right? Gan Eden was a time that the Kodesh Baruch Hu, he gave Adam everything he wanted, right? That basically that it was a perfect place where there was so much bruch and shefa the entire time, nonstop. Adam went ahead and he was makalkal that because he did the chet. He didn't follow the rules, so therefore he lost. But that's the ideal reality. We're going to go back to that one day. We know that in Moshe Mashiach, all the bracha comes back. No more suffering, no more difficult times. The Chiyas Mason gets even better. Olam haba, eternal pleasure, only eternal pleasure. After Gehenna lasts a certain period of time for some people, then after that, everyone goes to Olam haba, and it's eternal pleasure with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. That's the world that Hashem created. That's in fact, they asked the question: why is it that somebody who believes in Torah, believes in Mashiach, believes in Olam haba, just doesn't believe in Techis HaMeisim? He does not go to the world to come. Doesn't go to Techis HaMeisim and does not go to the world to come. I mean, he believes in everything else. If he doesn't believe in Torah, if he doesn't believe in Yemos Mashiach, he doesn't believe in Olam haba, fine. When you understand, he's an epikureus. But this person believes in everything except Techis HaMeisim. So why would he lose Olam haba for that? So they explain because the whole point of the Techis HaMeisim, resurrection of the dead, which many think takes place after 6,000, but according to the Zohar, actually takes place before 6,000, is actually the ideal world that we're looking forward to on this side of history, in Olam Hazeh, in this world. Olam haba comes later on, right? The spiritual world, but Techis HaMeisim, as you see, Yechezkel brings back the dead. Elisha brings back the dead. Right? They come back in a physical body with the soul. The Techis HaMeisim is the resurrection of the body. The soul is always there. It goes back so it's part of Olam Hazeh. And a person who does not believe in the Techis HaMeisim, it's as if they believe Hashem could not make a perfect world if he wanted to. As if this world that's imperfect was accidental, a failed experiment, and therefore Hashem is incapable of making it any better. So the Techis HaMeisim is Hashem saying, this is the world that could have existed. If you hadn't eaten from the Eitz Das Tov Ra, this is the world that could have existed. And as a result of that, we'll understand that all that went wrong was to do with us and for the good, to allow us to use our bechira throughout the course of our lives and choose the right thing to be able to earn schar in the world to come. So that's the way the world's supposed to be. So in Shemayim, all the shefa is up there and always exists. The problem is not creating it from scratch. The problem is a stima. It's like the water is in the pipes. The water is in the river. It goes to the water station. It's in the pipes, ready to come out. If you have a stima, if the pipe is blocked, the problem is not with the water. The problem is with the pipe, and that's the problem to us. So the Leshem explains, and we're davening, right? We're davening specifically for the sake of clearing the pipe, that the shefa can flow. Not that it's created, but the blessing can flow. So the Leshem explains, this is the reason why the Gemara says that anybody who's mishtate to Shem Shemayim b'tzaraso, koflim parnaso. Anybody who literally joins the name of Hashem with their suffering, they double their parnasa. So I saw this Gemara a lot of times, and I just figured, okay, it's extra reward. I'm a good boy. I did what I'm supposed to do. So Hashem says, you know what? I'll give you double the portion. Not because you earned double, but because I'm being nice to you. The Hashem says, no, you actually earned double the portion, double parnasa. Why? He says, because if a person understands that the reason why the parnasa is not coming is not because the system is broken down, but because the Shechina is being blocked. The Shechina wants, like a parent who wants to give to their child, but the child's misbehaving. It hurts the parents. So if a person understands that when they're not succeeding in life and they have difficulty, they have pain in their life, that the Shechina is suffering, and they daven for the Shechina, Moshe Rabbeinu, the law in his tefillah was not for Miriam. He says Miriam is sick. That means the Shechina is sick. So let me daven for the Shechina, and I'll take care of the cold, and the symptoms will take care of themselves. It's like the difference between like taking care of a running nose versus the cold itself. Okay, the running nose might get a bit better, but the cold's still there. Move someplace else. Take care of the cold, and all the symptoms go away on their own in the end. So that's what the Zohar answers: that the Shechina is suffering every single day, because it wants to give, it wants Mashiach to come, wants the ideal reality, wants the basic mikdash, but we're holding it back. So they say, I gotta give to these people what they need and what they want, but I can't because they're not ready for it. It's painful for the Shechina, and that's what Moshe was davening for. I mean, I only had 5 minutes, but boy, it was an impactful 5 minutes. At that, I just looked up and I looked around the whole base measures, people smiling and laughing and enjoying their learning, and I'm enjoying myself. And and it never occurred to me. David the Melech says to Nassan, Hanavi, he says to him, he says, how can I live in a palace? How can I live in a king's palace when the Shekhinah itself is living in a tent? I got to build a base of mikdash. I can't enjoy myself where the Shekhinah is in galus in a sense. It's like, how's that? Well, unfortunately, you can't because you have blood in your hands. But don't worry, it'll be named after you because of your heart. It's your base of mikdash. But technically speaking, it's not going to work. But that's the way he felt. That was he couldn't enjoy himself because Yerushalayim Oros Simchasi, right? Because the Shekhinah is the one that's suffering, that's in pain the entire time. So the Gemara says, you get double the portion because you daven for the Shekhinah, so you get parnasa for that reason, and now because of yourself as well, so you get parnasa for yourself too. So double the parnasa. But the main focus is, what is the Shekhinah feeling? How is it affecting the Shekhinah? That's one of the reasons why we fail in our tefillas, because people are davening for this and they're davening for that, and they're davening. I wish they come with the whole shopping list. And they even pour their heart out. And they say to Tehillim, the person still gets sick, or the person still dies, Rahman Islam, or this thing, because we're dealing with symptoms, not the cold itself, not the problem itself. And that's a problem. And that's what it means when it says that any generation in which the base of Mikdash is not rebuilt is one in which it's destroyed, because we're still doing the same thing. We're still focused on ourselves instead of the overall cause, the overall plan, what Kosh Baruch Hu wants to do with my separation. So I just want to read. We have time for a couple of things here. I think they're hugely important sources. There's lots of sources to this effect, but these are two that I think this one specifically is from Ori Cheskel, Rabbi Chetu Levenstein, who was the Mashgiach Ruchani of the Mir Yeshiva in Europe before the war, and Baruch Hashem survived the war, came to Israel, and was again the Mashgiach Ruchani of the Mir in Yerushalayim and Panovich as well. And he gave lots of shmuzin, when he was there, and very powerful. He was famous for this. He was a very powerful speaker and individual. And these were, he didn't write. These are his drusha they gave, and they were written down after by Talmidim. And so this is like literally word for word what he's saying. Obviously, someone edited, and it's called Emunas HaGeulah, faith in the Geulah. And this is what he says. I'm going to go a little bit fast and translate, but I'll try to explain at the same time because it's very important. Kasava Smak, Sefer Mitzvahs HaKatan. It's a parish on all the mitzvahs of the Torah, very famous in his beer on Mitzvahs Aseh, the positive mitzvah of Anochi Hashem Elokecha Asher Hotzitzach Meretz Mitzrayim, right? That the first of the 10 commandments, which is I am the Lord your God who took you out of from Mitzrayim, right? And he says that this mitzvah is parish on this, his explanation of this mitzvah is Leida she'oisa shabar shemayim v'aretz hu levado moishel malu umata. That the main, the reason why the mitzvah is parish on this is because the mitzvah is parish on this mitzvah is Leida she'oisa shabar shemayim v'aretz hu levado moishel malu umata. That the main, the reason why the mitzvah is parish on this mitzvah is point of this mitzvah, the main chiyuv of a person in this mitzvah is to know that the same God who created Shemaim and Aretz, the heavens and the earth, everything that exists, right? He is the same God who controls everything above and below. The angels above, the world below. Hashgacha pratis, it's all Hashem. It doesn't make a difference what goes on, how bad, how good, how lowly, how tumadik. It can't happen if Hashem doesn't sanction it. You can't have a government in power that's anti-Torah, anti-Haredim, cutting off funding if Hashem's not doing it. The question might be, why would he do a thing like that? That's a different story. But to empower them as if they're working against God's will, meaning that God's not sanctioned. No, it's not. It wouldn't happen. It didn't happen because Hashem didn't let it happen. If it's happening now, it's Hashem doing it. It's all one hashgacha pratis, which raises a lot of questions, but that's the idea. But he adds to this, that's no chiddush, that we know, right? He adds to this, right? He adds to this, an interesting thing that until I saw this, I think anyone would have seen this, would never have made the connection. Like, what does one have to do with the other? He says that this is the basis of what Chazal say, the Gemara in Shabbos. They ask a person on their Yom Adin, their day of judgment after they die, 6 questions, one of which is, Tzipisi Yeshua, did you anticipate the redemption? That's so many questions they can ask you on your Yom. Why did you do that? Why did you do this? Why did you do that? It's like, like so many, but they can ask you 6 questions. We won't go through all 6 questions right now, but one of which is, Tzipisi Yeshua, did you anticipate the redemption? Another game-changing, concept over here. But where's it written? Where did they get this from? Where did Chazal come up with this list of 6? One, the other ones kind of make a little bit more sense. I don't make more sense, but maybe you understand why they're there. Did you learn Torah? Did you establish times of Torah? Were you honest in business? But this one, Tzipisi Yeshua, rather, it seems to be from this mitzvah. It depends on this mitzvah. Right, the same way as this mitzvah says that we have to believe and have faith that HaKadosh Baruch Hu took us out of Mitzrayim, that He's the one who did it, as it says, "Anochi Hashem Elokecha," right? Asher says, "Remember Mitzrayim." I took him Mitzrayim. Okay, me'achashu diber hachi kamar. Right after it already has established this concept, okay, כשם שאני רוצה שתאמין בי שאני הוצאתי אתכם, כך אני רוצה שתאמין בי שאני השם אלוקיכם ואני אעשה לקבץ אתכם ושלכם וכן שאין במלחמה שניס עין שם. But the same way that you have a mitzvah deraisa embedded in the first mitzvah of the 10 Commandments, I mean, how much more chashuv could you get than that? It's a foundation of foundations. In that mitzvah is the belief Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim. The Sefer Mitzvah Sakatna, Rishon, is coming along and saying after this, that the same way to believe that, Hashem is saying, I also want you to believe, it's also a mitzvah deraisa, a Torah mitzvah to believe, that I will also take you out of shibud, out of exile a second time. Now, there's already been 3 or 4, but the main one, right? In fact, the final one, Chazal says, is really just the completion of the first one. We left Mitzrayim physically, but we didn't leave fully spiritually back to the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. And the final redemption is really the completion of the first redemption, which is why it's called Ketz Yamim, which means the end of days. But the gematria of Ketz is 190, because we left Mitzrayim 190 years early. That's Yadu, that's no. So the ones in between are kind of like subsets, they're portions of the redemption from Bavel, Purim time and Chanukah time. They're like subsets, and not really. But the main final redemption, Ketz Yamim, that's from Mitzrayim of history, so to speak. Because Mitzrayim is a concept. It was a place, and it is a place in the Atlas, but technically speaking, Kabbalistically speaking, Mitzrayim is more of a concept. Any place in the world that stifles the learning of Torah, it stifles ruchnius, it stifles a connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is by definition a Mitzrayim, Kabbalistically. So you can have it all through history. So Haggadah says everybody has to look at themselves as if they too left Mitzrayim, because we always are in every generation. So they said he says this is the shorish of what Chazal say. Chazal say it's a piece of the Yeshua, anticipate the redemption, is coming from the mitzvah of Anochi Hashem Elokecha. It's an aspect of the most important mitzvah that the Jewish people have in terms of Amunah and Bul. It's mind-boggling because, as he's going to say in a second, right? So he says, "V'hinei kasher nivdok kasher nivdok es atzmeinu." When we check ourselves out, right, be'inyan zeh, regarding this, okay, nira shrechokim anu me'od min ha'emunah b'geulah hasidah. Seems like just the opposite. It seems that we're really very distant, very far from any belief in the final redemption, future redemption. Okay. Ubinyanei emunah Hashem yisbarach shebar shemayim va'aretz u'mashgiach u'manhig es habriya. When it comes to this idea that Hashem made Shemayim and Aretz and that He runs the entire world, okay, we talk about that. That's not such a hard thing to get someone to come up, and that's Ashkacha Pratis. In everyday conversation, people say it's Ashkacha Pratis. Rabbanim get up and the bima and talk about how Hashem made the world and Parashat Bereshit. It's unavoidable. I mean, you can't not talk about that and believe in that. I mean, this is if you don't believe in anything less, it's against the Torah. You have to believe it. Everything is from the Kodesh Baruch Hu. We talk about these things. This is not so hard for the average Jew to be involved with. We enjoy talking about things like that. When it comes to talking about the arrival of Mashiach, the Chis HaMesim, and the resurrection of the dead, einenu medabrim klal. Not a topic of conversation. It's not the point of a drash, not the point of most sfarim coming out. It's not on our minds, not on our lips, not on our brains, right? Klal, at all. Not just at all. Kiviyocho, it's as if misbaishim anu bezeh, right? It's as if we're embarrassed to talk about these things. Bekilu zeh etzlenu la'achar yeush, and we gave up. We give up. The Gemara says that one of the simanim before Mashiach comes is we give up on Geulah. Now, there's two types of giving up on Geulah. There's the kind that comes like in the Holocaust, where people were so broken and such despair they couldn't even think about it. Moshe Rabbeinu comes to Mitzrayim to free the Jewish people, and it says they're kotzer ruach. They can't even listen to the idea of redemption. It's just not on. It's just. Their minds just aren't there. That's the yeyush that we used to think about. But there's a second kind of yeyush. It's the kind, unfortunately, that we suffer from. And that's the kind that's always brings to mind a joke that I heard many years ago from my father-in-law about somebody who goes to shul. And he's kind of an Amaretz, but he loves to listen to the rabbi talk about in Yearning of Torah and Shabbos. And he comes home Shabbos day after the davening, and over the Shabbos table, he shares the Devar Torah with his wife. And one day he comes home very distraught, he's living in Chutz La'aretz, very distraught. And his wife said, "What's the matter? What happened?" He says, "The rabbi spoke about something was terrible. I don't have to do with it. It's like I'm terrified." He says, "What? What could the rabbi possibly talk about that's so terrifying?" And he says he mentioned this Mashiach fellow who's going to come, and we're going to leave our houses behind, and we're going to pack up, and we're going to move there to Israel. What's going to be? How are we going to survive that? And his wife smiles and she says, "That's okay. Yankim, calm down, relax. It's okay. Kodesh Baruch Hu saved us from the Crusades. He saved us from the pogroms. He'll save us from Mashiach too. It's an inconvenience. Who wants to move? Who wants to go someplace? Who wants to move there to Israel? Who wants to go to the Middle East? Who wants to make Aliyah?" That's also yeyush. There's a yeyush that comes from having no hope. And there's the issue that comes from having no need for hope, meaning that as far as you're concerned, the Malbim speaks about this, how at the end of history, and he's talking in the 1800s before this is even comprehensible, about how the Shibud and the Jewish people will get to a point where finally they will no longer be captive en masse in any country. I mean, that's for thousands of years. Someplace there was a large group of Jews who were always being held captive. And finally, Russia collapses at the end of the 1980s, and there's no real place in the world that Jews en masse, a whole bunch of Jews, can't go out and can't be Jewish if they want to. And he predicted this. And he says, when this happens, it's based upon a pasuk in Yirmiyahu that says will be the Rosh, the head of nations, and there'll be tremendous simcha for Yaakov. And he says, talking about the Jewish people who will not become heads of banks, it isn't banks, but he says heads of the nations of the world, leaders in government. I mean, these are things we take for granted that we have today that 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 years ago, heads of banks for the Gentile nations. It was a huge chiddush that came about most in the 40s and 50s and 60s and all that. And he says there'll be tremendous joy because after being killed and brutalized for so many years, we're finally on par. We get equal paychecks and can live in the same neighborhoods if we want to and drive the same fancy cars. He says that's going to be called Yaakov. That's the lesser group of the Jewish people at the end of history. But the better, the more higher level is called Yisrael, and they will say until the base of Mikdash is rebuilt and the Shekhinah returns to it and the Galus ends, it's not called. These are all nice things. We're not saying don't use them to our advantage and enjoy them, but you can't stop there. It has to go on. You have to be further, right? The fact that we have all the success and no longer feel a need for Mashiach and Geulah is also a form of Yeush. Maybe a little bit different than the one that he's talking about here. It's also called Yeush too. So that's what he says. V'divrei smak, Rabbi Cheslo speaking now. Tzrichim orer hareda b'libeinu. But if you listen to the words of the smak, it should create trembling in our hearts, right? Since the whole mitzvah, it's a piece of Yeshua. Now, what does it mean to anticipate the redemption? What does that mean, right? So, in on some level, we understand in everyday life. If you're anticipating a check in the mail or some payment through online, you keep looking for it. I mean, I know I do. It's like, when's it coming? When's it coming? You go to the mailbox. In the old days, you check the mailbox. You're anticipating going on a trip somewhere. You're going to Teal with the family, and during Ben Hazmanim, there's like start do all the planning weeks in advance. You have to book the car at least a month or two in advance to make sure you have one, right? And the hotel, the simmer, and all the activities and the food. It's all going to be you're anticipating it. So when you're anticipating something, your whole life kind of revolves around it. It's not like one day there's going to be Mashiach. One day I can't. No, your life revolves around it. Anticipating means your whole world this is the world that you're living in. It's a piece of Yeshua. Anticipating the redemption means that I as much as I'm enjoying myself, and I can't really fully do it. I shouldn't fully do it. It's not just a symbolic gesture. It's going to be the heart of Klal Yisrael, because if it's not the heart of Klal Yisrael, we're destroying the base of Mikdash. We're not bringing it back, so we're destroying the base of Mikdash. Because it's a metzias, it's a reality. So he says, anybody who's not involved in this mitzvah and mekayim this mitzvah, it's a piece of Yeshua, he says, it's kili, you have no munah. It's not that you don't have just a munah in Mashiach and the Geulah. Whatever other emunah you have is not really real in the end. He goes on to explain a little bit more, but he actually says it over here. It's also very important, right? That's part of the whole idea, right? If I can just find it very quickly. He says, right? Anybody who does not know what does understand and has faith and believes that and anticipates, looks forward to his coming, Mashiach, and if you're not going to look forward to it, you're not going to merit to see him in the end. How do we know that? He says, Kashem the Chazinin. You have to understand, he's talking to Panovich Yeshiva. He's not talking to a bunch of beginners who are just finding out whether Torah is true or not. He's not talking to a bunch of people who have they're weak in their emunah. This is the 60s, not so far from the Holocaust yet, okay? And these are learners. These are people who, Torah so their whole world is learning Torah, and they're doing mitzvahs. And this is like, the starkest of people at that time, and he's talking like this to them. So how much more so to people on lesser levels? So he says, right? Right, as the Medrash says, and Rashi brings down on the Chumash itself, and Parashat Pesholach and Parashat Bo as well, that we saw only 1 out of every 5 left Mitzrayim. 4/5 died in Makas Choshech, and some say that there was a smaller number that was only 1 in 50 came out. Rabbi Chazal in Shmos Rabbah, Shekadosh Baruch Hu boichin leiv. It's brought down the Medrash in Shmos Rabbah. Kadosh Baruch Hu, he checks the heart of a person, v'choker klios, and their kidneys, meaning their inner consciousness. V'ra'ah b'acherim shayu lehem shurus b'Mitzrayim. Right, Vayu chas lehem b'ritzon yisem Mitzrayim. Kadosh Baruch Hu, not that they went around campaigning necessarily to go out, right? To not go out, right? To not go out. The 4/5 that died weren't like standing up on podiums and beamers and saying, we shouldn't go out, we shouldn't go out. They weren't doing that. Because Baruch Hu, he looked into what they were feeling, where their mind was, their mindset towards Geulah. It was hidden from other people, but not to Kosh Baruch Hu, right? He saw that they were enjoying that they had the power in Mitzrayim, because don't forget, Mitzrayim is being destroyed, so now they have the upper hand, and they want to stay Mitzrayim. But Hashem saw that they didn't want a chelik in Geulah. It wasn't on their agenda. So therefore, so therefore they died during the 3 days of darkness. And they were not zoicha to leave Mitzrayim. And this, the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, is bringing that as well over here. That this is the way it's going to work also in the final redemption, right? The final redemption, whether you're going to be allowed to be there, to actually be able to enjoy it, be a part of it, is going to depend upon how much you want it, how much you yearn for it. That's what he's saying here, right? How much the schus, right? It's an imperative. It's an imperative that you have this yearning, not just okay, if it comes, I'll be part of it. I can't wait, kind of, but no, it's like I'm not shalek. The Shechina isn't galus. I may be having a blast, right? But coronavirus was partly to wake us up to this reality. All the things that go wrong for Klal Yisrael is to wake us up to this reality. It's part of preparing us for the final redemption, to get the proper mindset. Right, so you're going to say, Shamuna Mitzrayim, Haisa Rak Mekoich Amuna, the leaving Mitzrayim, we know from Chazal, that was all built upon the Koich of Amuna, Shadai Lo Nitna Torah Yisrael, because at that point in time the Jewish people didn't receive Torah yet, so Amuna was everything. And they had to believe in the Kabbalah, the tradition they had, that someone would come in the future and redeem them. But we are 3,000 years away down the road. We have received the Torah at this point in time. And it goes on, there's pages here of the same idea, more reinforcing it. But the main point he's making is that if you want to be around for the fight of redemption, you want to be a part of it, you have to want it. You have to believe in it. Your life has to revolve around it. That's what he says. So the second quote, I suggest people get the Sefer and read it because it's very important. But it goes. This the second quote is coming from Torah, which is basically what, according to the Talmidim of the Gra, that was the Masorah that the Gra gave to them. It was never meant to be a sefer for everybody, and that's why it wasn't published until much later on, until the 50s, I believe. It's manuscripts. It was what the Vilna Gaon gave to his Talmidim, because as a 5500, the Zohar says that begins the Erev Shabbos of history. And track of time here. The Erev Shabbos of history, meaning that we're in the final phase. As a 5500, that's 1740, that's hundreds of years ago at this point in time. He called that generation from that point onward the Dor Basra'ah, the final generation. And as a result of that, he turned his attention at the age of 20 to Kibbutz Galios. And here we are, for those of us living here, in Eretz Yisrael, on the tail end of what he began. Because before the Gra, and I believe the Baal Shem Tov also, before they began their movement in the direction of Eretz Yisrael, there was almost no one here. There was always a handful of Jews living in Eretz Yisrael, I understand, but nothing significant. It was a barren land, a wasteland. Other nations tried to build it up, but it didn't work. It was a very important strategic place to Asia and Persia and things like that, but it didn't succeed while the Jews were gone, just like the Torah said would be the case. And in 55, he said, this is the time. Hashem said, this is a time to begin the process of returning the Jews and rebuilding the Yishuv. And he wrote a sefer, the sefer is called Kol Torah. It's controversial, which is the best proof of all how important it is, because it's the only sefer I know of, that I'm aware of, that deals with the issue of Mashiach ben Yosef specifically. Mashiach ben Yosef is the key to Mashiach ben David. The Sitra Achra will definitely let you talk about Mashiach ben Yosef, because that's like having the key to the inside door without the key to the outside door. A lot of good is going to do you. But this sefer is hands-on, tells us what we're supposed to do to expedite the redemption. So of course, this sefer is going to be controversial and be running against it, because that's what holds off the Geulah, which of course is what the Sitra Achra wants to do. Anyhow, Baruch Hashem, the manuscript survivor, Chaim Friedlander gives us a skam, Mother Gedolim also at the beginning of it, won't go through the history and the whole thing, but everything in the Sefer can be found in part, if not whole, in other Sfarim of the Gra that we know he did write for sure and published. So I have no problem quoting from the Sefer after seeing the other things I've seen, right? And anyhow, there's nothing here that really is controversial in the Geulah framework of Torah. And he says the following thing here. He says, Klal Gada Bavodas Ikvaz Mashiach. This is a major principle when it comes to the service, the service of Hashem regarding the footsteps of Mashiach, meaning the end of history, right? Shekol Shlosha Yesodas Ikarim Yehudim Modim. Yehudim is very big on this idea, which Yehudim are, and Modim Yehudim refer to the people at the end of history who are appointed. They're appointed people who take care of things to do with Geulah. They just, like the Gra, for example, they arise and take a role in the process of either Kibbutz Galios or revealing Sod in the world or building Eretz Yisrael. They have a prominent role. These are the Yehudim. Moadim are the appointed times, as the pasuk refers to it. There are times that are Mesugal for Geulah, and the Yehudim, right, are the things that have to happen, the events, the specific events that happen to make things, trigger things like the War of Independence or whatever is going on in history that furthers the cause. Even the Holocaust falls in this category. So he says, regarding these three things, Tzrichim lavo ke'echad, they have to all come together at the same time. Bad bebad, b'chut meshulash, bal yinetek. You'll find that in history you'll have Yehudim, but nothing happens. You have Moadim and nothing happens. You have Yehudim, and again, it's a hint, but nothing happens. They have to come together at the same time. And when they do, big Geulah things take place. So he says, he says, meaning you have to have the maisim, right, that take place. The zmanim, the time has to be appropriate, and the shlichim, the people have to be around to do things that will expedite the redemption. Can you imagine pasuk and itzarim be'aretz eis hazamir hagiv v'kol tor? The sefer comes from Nishma B'Artzeinu, pasuk from Shir Shem per base pasuk Zayin, I believe, where it talks about how they'll be budding in the land of Eretz Yisrael, right? Things will start to sprout and grow, and the voice of the turtle dove, which is a symbol of Geulah, will be heard in the land. That's a major pasuk to do with redemption. I mean, all through Shir Hashem you have this, but this pasuk specifically, which is where the name comes from, Kol Torah, right? So he says, "V'netzarim." What are netzarim, right? He says, "Hainu hayudim." These are the people who are going to be appointed to do special things in the Geulah. Eis Zamir, the time of the planting of that's the modim, the appointed times, meaning that history has to have what the Gemara calls ketzim, pre-designed, pre-planned events by Kodesh Baruch Hu, by which certain things have to happen for the sake of Geulah, as the Gemara speaks about in Sanhedrin on Sadi Zayin Amud Beis. Okay, that's why you find that there are events that occur in history that just don't make sense, given the natural flow of history this should not have happened, or this should have happened but didn't happen. Why? Because of Moedim. So history has two parts to it. There are times where we're just kind of floating because it's in between Katesin, but when a Kates comes, right, the music changes, the beat changes, so to speak, because Baruch Hu starts to impose himself more directly in history and makes things happen that don't make sense. Don't be fooled by the people and the props and all that and the conspiracy. Don't be, because Baruch Hu is making things happen. He's making things spin in a certain way to force us to do things that we need to do for the sake of Geulah, but we're not doing. So that's how it works, right? So he says, Kol Torah, Hainam Yudim, right? These are the special events that to take place. V'chein lifnei pasuk. So v'lefi pasuk, he eis lechanin kival me'ed. The pasuk says we just that in Tehillim, right? Very important pasuk, famous pasuk. Kuf beis Yudala Tedvav, right? Where it says Atata kum terchem tzion ki eis lechanin kival mo'ed. Ki ratzu avadecha esaf neha esafrei chanenu. Right, the appointed time for Geulah will come, and you will show mercy, mercy on the Jewish people. Why? Because your servants, they want her stones, they cherish her dust. You had Tanayim, rabbis of the Mishnah, who would roll in the dust of Eretz Yisrael just to fulfill this verse of loving the land. Okay. He says, "Ki ratzav decha esav neya besav yachanenu." V'chein pasuk ke'eis l'chol chavetz. Kolomar. What does this mean? What does this mean? She'eis ba lefi chavetz Yisrael b'isrus l'tata. What is this verse telling us? Wow, it's like 3,000 years and Mashiach is still not here yet. We've been waiting and waiting. And the whole, it's like the whole time. Right, where's Mashiach? Why hasn't he come yet? We have this image in my head. We're down here twiddling our thumbs. Where's Mashiach? But HaKadosh Baruch Hu is up in Shemaim, Kevayochel, twiddling his thumbs. When will they bring Mashiach? This pasuk is saying, you want Mashiach to come? It comes from below. Isrus l'tata. We have to. It's orarus from below. We're waiting for from above. No. Above is waiting for from below, he says, right? He says, as the pasuk says in Yeshaya, that I am God, and in its time I will hasten it. Hainu afilu be'ita, that even at the last possible moment that Mashiach can come, right? Mitai. After it goes into the idea of one become 1,000, we can explain right now, but this is the point he makes. It's upon us to see, la'asos, and to do the kol kama sheyesh b'koich deitenu bezer hachanein la'adam de'as al pi Rabbeinu al pi Rabbeinu Agra v'ramizim kadish v'kol koich yedinu b'maiser cheshbon lashvos, right? That we have to do whatever we can for the sake of the Geulah. And we're running out of time here, so I just finished by saying that he adds a mind-blowing thing. A person will say, he says, how can I make a difference? Look at the world, it's massive, it's huge. There's so much that has to happen before Mashiach comes. What can I possibly do? He says, the pasuk is telling you that if you do one little thing, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will magnify 1,000 times at least. Can you imagine that? Talk about returns on your dollar, right? You invest $1, you get back $1,000, invest 10,000, that's a lot of return for your money. He says the pasuk is telling you that the more that we do, the more, it's like we're approaching from two different directions, two different sides. We go this way, Shem goes this way. We shorten the time for redemption by taking steps forward. He's not waiting, come like a father who says to the kids who's learning how to walk, No. Hashem gets up and walks towards us as we walk towards him, and we shorten the time. But the most important part, he says, you do a little bit, because Baruch Hu does a ton, a massive amount. And I've spoken to people who have been involved in these processes of Geulah, and they all have similar stories, how you just do something and so many things happen as a result of it you could never plan. So many things. Money, this thing, success. There are obstacles too, because the Sitra, we're not done with the Sitracha yet. He wants to stop the process. He wants to interfere, but you can't give up. Go forward. You have to understand because Baruch Hu is there with us. He wants to bring it more than we want to bring it. And if we understand that the Shechina is sorry, you have to bring that redemption, get back home to Beis Hamikdash, and we do whatever we can, whatever we can. We don't just bring Mashiach, we rebuild the Beis Hamikdash. And we have 9 days, now 8 days, almost 7 days at this point in time before Tisha B'Av. That's the tikkun. That's the tshuva. And that's what turns Tisha B'Av into a moed. And we should be zeichet to see that happen this year, Rosh Hashanah, in our time. And to be shutfin, to be partners of the Kosh Baruch in the process, get the schar for it, and to be zeicha, to be there, to mekabel penei Mashiach without any further suffering.